Sonic the Continuation, Issue 16. We see a flying machine with Techno and Shorty in it, and Shorty says that this is what they spent 2 years putting his armor back together for. Both of them take it seriously that Robotnik's back. Shortfuse always expected it to happen again, which makes sense despite its unlikeliness to happen, because after he was forced to spend years trapped in Cybernetic armor, he'd hate Robotnik more than anyone, and would think it was too good to be true that he wouldn't be back again. A robot threatens Zoe with Techno saying that there's tons of robots in the village, and Shortfuse defeats it. Shortfuse says that as soon as Emerald Hill Zone is safe, he's gonna fly up to Robotnik and do what he should have done years ago and defeat Robotnik for good. That's what he'd do if he was smart, but the comic would never get rid of Robotnik anyways. But this still makes way more sense for his character than his sparing Robotnik in issue 67. Him saying that Emerald Hill Zone could be saved later is confusing because I thought Sonic failed and the laser destroyed it. It makes sense that most people are too scared of the space cannon to fight back because if they do, they think the whole zone will get vaporized. But Techno and Shortfuse are completely ignoring this, so I hope they have a quick and safe way to evacuate everyone in the zone they're endangering by smashing these robots for them. At first I was worried that Techno said Shorty's name to nag him that killing Robotnik would be wrong, but instead she says that his suit wasn't built to withstand outer space. I thought it was invincible. I guess her suit isn't as good. He got shocked and was fine. This makes more sense though, it's got some balance to it. It's just confusing because I thought she was the one who made his original Cybernetic suit. He tells her to start working on an air tank and stronger rockets. It's cool to see the E-Series robots defending the Emerald Hill people. We're finally seeing what they'd do if they survived. Gamma gets told that Eggman always had a grudge against them and is told to get them to safety. Cream's scared, Vanilla reassures her, and Shortfuse says look out behind you, and Vanilla gets hit away by something, as I'm forced to assume that years passed all of a sudden so that Cream is a 3-year-old at youngest instead of a baby. There's never any indication of a time skip in this comic, so it comes off as the writer randomly changing Cream's age to be what fans would expect just to humor them instead of making sense. I can only assume there were years of peace without Eggman where Tikal was looking for the emeralds, and by the time issue 15's prologue started, Cream was able to walk. It is shocking that Vanilla got hit, but if the writer wanted me to be entirely focused on this, I can't because Cream's age change is too distracting. A character like Vanilla of all people getting hurt immediately reminded me of when she was turned into a zombie on IDW. When even she gets in trouble, you know things are getting serious. The writer's not holding back. Aside from the fact that she'll survive, that is. Shortfuse defeats a robot and tells Techno that they need medics and evacuation assistance. Techno sends out a distress signal to Porker, who acts with newfound confidence, which is cool but still kind of confusing. It makes sense that he'd want to do anything he can to spite Robotnik now that he's a tyrant again, but he was still established as an easily scared person before this. It's refreshing that the Fleetway characters are getting a bunch of focus now after being ignored and given the shaft the entire comic. But it's sad that I have to compliment this. Porker says it's a good thing he made so many new friends during his recovery from Chaos's attack at the hospital, because these medical transports are needed right now. Porker tells people to get on board a shuttle, and Techno spots 200 more badniks on her screen. This is intense, but it could still get repetitive to see Shortfuse make short work of badniks too often. He just kills them in one hit. Reality ensues because Porker says that they don't have enough space on the transports to take everyone, so some people will have to get across the border on foot. Shortfuse says he'll do his best to clear a path, but he's got a lot to fight right now. I love that him and Techno and Porker are being admirable heroes, saving people. Then Shortfuse sees an injured Sonic, Tails, and Shadow. He threatens Shadow. Then we see Supersonic looking mad, as the text box at the bottom tells you to see Sonic the Continuation issue 15 pages 26 to 30. So the story up to this point was actually a flashback to right after Eggman started sending his robots out of a satellite to take over a town. Which is a concept that was already done, aren't you, Sonic? It was how Robotnik took over Metropolis again. Maybe that's why I wasn't too impressed. I hated that depressing plot point last time, and this is even more confusing because it wasn't made clear that Eggman had a ton of time to make a robot army on the satellite, like he would have from hiding his presence for so long in Archie. Anyways, after we see the laser hit a place leaving a crater, Shortview says that Emerald Hill Zone is gone, which is even more depressing because Emerald Village was the location of the Heroes' village since almost the earliest of STC. What's next to go? Metropolis? And Sonic's worried about by Tails, and Crane's worried about her mother. Yeesh, she lost her eye? At least it's covered. At least her not having depth perception makes her a bit more interesting with that eye patch. Porker thanks the doctor and looks at a campfire with people around it and says that not everyone made it out of the zone. And Tails is on his knees with his hands over his eyes. Of course, I don't believe for a second that Sonic didn't survive. He was super the last time we saw him. But I guess the writer doesn't expect you to think he didn't survive this. Shorty says that the United Federations, Begonia, China, and Adabat have all surrendered to Robotnik, which makes sense since they just saw that Eggman's threat of zone destruction wasn't a bluff. I don't blame them. Techno says a few zones might try to hold out, but they won't last long. I kinda liked that the human zones in particular were all mentioned together. I preferred if Eggman was only ruling over the other humans in a continuity. Amy says she won't believe Sonic's dead until she's seen the body and gives a rousing speech to her friends to not give up because they're the freedom fighters. She also says they're the resistance, like a reference to Sonic Forces. Good thing she didn't literally rename her team that. Amy got a meaningful haircut, returning to her SCC hairstyle. About damn time! With all of the ways this comic has been removing stuff that made it like SCC, I'm grateful for something like this. Even SCC Online never did that. I assume Amy returned to her old look specifically to motivate her friends by getting them back in the old freedom fighter mindset. Now's the perfect time. Orbot tells Eggman that Egg Pawn forces are now in control of every national capital city, and roundup of potential rebels is proceeding without incident. While it's depressing, it's good writing that we're being told that he's rounding up rebels to immediately drive the point home that he's an evil tyrant and his rule is a terrible thing, though it's already obvious. But this is telling us about something he's really doing wrong. Eggman is smart enough to doubt that Sonic's gone after all the times he thought he was. It's interesting that Orbot says that the Emeralds need time to recharge the Ark because they don't have the Master Emeralds to bolster them. So the Eclipse Cannon won't be able to fire again for a long time. Shadow refuses to let the robot woman treat his wound because he can heal on his own. At least that's a clear character moment it is aside from him just being a stubborn supporter of Eggman who's 100% evil. Eggman shows appreciation for Shadow and wastes our time bragging about stuff we already know, and assumes that no one will trust Sonic if they see him again just because he framed him like an SA2. And I hope most people will trust Sonic because I hated it when SCC Online ruined its reputation for an arc. And that had a much better excuse to do that. No one thinks that Sonic tried to be a big villain like they thought in that, so there's no reason people would buy that he's not a hero who's gonna fight Eggman. Too bad the last page of the issue wasn't used on plot progression instead. Sonic the Continuation, Issue 17. It starts out with Tikal narrating that she's been trapped in a cell in Eggman's prison for weeks that has robots for wardens. I guess she was kidnapped to be used as a hostage and bait to manipulate Knuckles into showing up. She sees a robot tell a family that they'll remain here until they're called for. I just feel bad for Tikal. People are being kidnapped for being enemies of Robotnik, but wouldn't you consider literally everyone to be his enemy? All the prisons would become full. Then there's a rumble sound and a power down in the detention center. Tikal runs up to a ladder and sees a civilian get grabbed by a robot and apologizes while climbing down it, showing her compassion. Eggman's called in for reinforcements at the colony space dock, so some of the robots here are going to be called away, while the other robots are being sent after the prisoners. They're told to avoid lethal shots so that the prisoners can be in good health for experiments, which somehow weren't already carried out after weeks. Tikal sees that this is a robot factory, and she briefly angsts that she's powerless without her staff. Then she says that her responsibility is to get the emeralds she lost back, and kicks away something to escape from the air vent. It's really noisy going through an air vent, according to Mythbusters. I guess the noise she made was being drowned out by the noise of all the other prisoners trying to run around and escape from the robots going after them. Tikal's just running on desperation as she thinks she can find the emerald successfully by herself. Then after Tikal realizes that she's in a prison in space, she sees Shadow. I wanted to see what the heroes were doing. She sees him fighting a robot in space that reminds me of the Metrics. The only way he could survive space that long is if he was some sort of android that didn't need to breathe. It should have been explained at the very least that Shadow had a bubble shield. She thinks that's what's been causing rumbles and sees some robots and gets pulled into an air vent by Rouge, who doesn't explain why she knows who Dekal is. How did Gunn find out about her? Rouge says she's here to shut it down. It's hard for me to have faith in her to do that. Not only because SA2 didn't do that, but because she's not Sonicor's friends. She thinks she needs Dekal's help because the emeralds are so powerful that she'll need expertise to shut the cannon down. Why does she think she can't just take the emeralds out of the cannon and leave? I love seeing Dekal and Rouge interact for the first time. Eggman tells the robot to open the door to see something for himself, and finds a Metrix that calls Shadow an overzealous doorman, and calls Eggman Sunshine. I'm guessing he's the crazy Metrix that fought in front of Cosmo because of how he talks. As usual though, he's living proof that a character with a boring enough design can't make up for it with silly dialogue. Shadow tells Eggman to let him destroy this idiot. If he really wanted to destroy him, he would have used Chaos Control to teleport half of them away. But he's too stupid to think of that. Eggman's told that the Metrics are the galaxy's best military force and is intrigued. Aspen tells him he needs Eggman's help to get out of the planet's orbit, and says he'll fight for Eggman while he recharges himself with time and resources. I love seeing the Metrics desperately come to Eggman for help instead, with him being in charge. It feels more right for the menacing main villain. It's entertaining that when Shadow says this guy wrecked a lot of their defense grid, he says, "What better way to present my resume?" It's smart of Eggman to just be impressed with him instead of being too short-tempered like I'd expect. Then Aspen says he needs a safe place to store Cosmo, and she coughs for some reason after being let out of him. I have to just assume that the only reason these two bad guys have those expressions is because Aspen lied that she bites. So this issue by Al-Qaeda was an epic story about Eggman coming back to power, showing that the heroes aren't going to give up. But they better be careful about that since it was made really obvious that his zone will get destroyed if there's any freedom fighting in it. So the only thing they should be focusing on is going to destroy the Eclipse cannon. It was pretty epic that Amy got her hair standing up again because it was a callback to when she was fighting Robotnik when he was in power. She did it just to give people hope. It certainly gave me hope because she was being like Fleetway, rather than the comic trying to be too much like the games. Techno and Shortfuse helping out also helped with that. This issue by Akira was about Tikal escaping the prison that's in space because there's a big commotion caused by Shadow fighting a Metrix called Aspen. And Tikal meets up with Rouge, who saves her, and they want to take out the cannon, but nothing really comes of that, because the story ends there, with Aspen deciding to join Eggman. So he's just going to be another dangerous robot for Sonic to fight. I don't feel like Tikal's story at a point because we didn't see its resolution, and the next issue isn't going to be focused on her, thankfully.